Okay, hi everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Method to Our Madness podcast. I'm Stacey Marola, Ph.D., and I'm here with my co-host Bill Pate.
Hello.
And just as a little preface for today's episode, a couple episodes ago we did talk about like the future of the evaluation field, and we sort of talked a little bit about how there were federal funding cuts in 2025 that basically led to a lot of layoffs. I've been calling it being doged because that's a better description of what happened to people, not just layoffs. Like there's a whole kind of like when you have a death certificate, it says just a heart attack, but the heart attack was actually caused by something else. You really want to know what the root cause of the condition is. So yeah, so I call it being doged, and that included me. I was doged. But one of the good things that's come out of that are the support communities that have sort of arisen. There are people that I've met because of this that I probably would never have met otherwise. And one of them is our guest today, Tara Fannon, who has been using her research skills to get a better understanding of the experiences of people in our field that have experienced being doged. So I'll let Tara introduce herself.
Hi, thanks, Stacey. Thanks, Bill, for having me. So, yeah, I guess a little bit about me for context. As Stacey said, my name is Tara Fannon. I'm a PhD sociologist, 15 years of mixed methods research experience, also a former government contractor who was doged. I was laid off last April, late April, as part of the purge, as I like to call it, because that's what it felt like. And I saw that, and as Stacey noted there, that I was kind of using my research skills to, I guess, understand this experience a little bit more and connect with others. I was also very protested out the last administration. I was in the streets protesting, and I wanted to, you know, take a different approach this time that wasn't so exhausting. And I saw that federal layoffs were generating some media coverage and public debate, albeit not as much as I would have liked to have seen. But the government contracting layoffs were receiving less attention, despite the government's heavy reliance on the sector to do core and critical work. So I decided to do what I do best and love the most, research. Yeah, and I can talk about, what that research has looked like and what has come out of it.
Yeah, can you talk a little bit, to start off, like, how'd you get started? Did you just say, hey, let me go on LinkedIn and find some people to interview, or how
Yeah,
did you do this?
for sure. Well, I guess it kind of all, so I'm calling I'm tentatively calling it right now because I'm in the process of, I've written out my results. Now I'm in the process of kind of putting those results into sort of like an article format for media outlets, right? I've written plenty of like industry articles and peer-reviewed articles. So writing for like journalism is slightly different, but I'm calling it the GovCon Stories Project tentatively. And it grew out of my need to process my own experience of losing a job that I loved and that I built from scratch. I was a research director. I built the first ever research practice at my former employer. And I wanted to just kind of move through the fallout of that. And for me, that was like a loss of purpose, a loss of primary income, obviously, critical benefits, and mental health decline, if I'm being honest. And I knew that I couldn't possibly be alone in that experience. So I just decided to, I don't know, just do it and approach it like I would approach any other research, like the design of research, kind of mapping out what mixed methods research would look like. I did a survey, I conducted interviews, I can talk more about exactly like what that looked, sort of the methodology. So and then just sort of using in what we call in qualitative is like a snowball sampling, right? Like kind of reaching out to people, putting a call out, and then sort of using those people that participated in the interviews to, point me in the direction of others I could reach out to, or they reach out for me and they would get back in touch with me. And we just kind of went from there. So between May and October 2025, I anonymously surveyed 92 contractors, across diverse functions across the country, age, gender, race. Some were veterans, some weren't veterans. I did interviews with 20 additional folks, and then 15 of those people provided email updates on their personal and professional lives 1 year later. And yeah, I just was just, kind of asking, just kind of designing it around like, how is this impacting you personally? How is this impacting you professionally? What is this meant for you? What is next for you? Do you even know? Where do you see the industry going or the sector going? What would you like to see be different going forward? And I wanted to kind of tap into the sort of the human side of what was happening kind of at a system level, but also understand how it was sort of impacting or shaping like broader, social and economic forces and what that might look like kind of going ahead. So kind of connecting the micro and macro there. Yeah, I guess, I would say the human cost of late stage crony capitalism, in my opinion, often gets lost in metrics and market trends. And honestly, lately the media's struggle to keep up with the downstream effects of overreach and power grabbing by the government and many corporations. And I wanted to tell people stories. So that's kind of how it started, how it's been going. Some of the why and the what, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, if you could talk a little bit more about the methodology, I think this is a great case study as well as like the findings are really relevant to a lot of people. So
Sure. Yeah. So it was, as I said, mixed methods. I started with an anonymous survey and I guess, I just asked myself questions. Like I was just sort of like, what am I going, just kind of like positioned myself, what was I kind of grappling with? What were some of the questions I had and kind of used that to guide my survey design and programming. It was an unsophisticated survey. It was just pretty straightforward. It was closed-ended questions. It was open-ended questions. It was relatively short because I wanted to incentivize people to fill it out because I wasn't compensating anybody for it. It was purely voluntary. And I wanted to cast the net wide across, age, race, gender. It's hard to do that when you're kind of putting it out there and people are voluntarily filling it out, but it turned out to be pretty diverse. It skewed white and male, unsurprisingly, because, white men kind of dominate most spaces, but I did get kind of a snapshot into other things, other lived experiences, I should say. And then I used sort of the findings of that. I kind of did a preliminary kind of analysis, generating some emerging themes and use that to inform my interview questions, to dig a little bit deeper into kind of what people were feeling and needing and wanting and just kind of how they were navigating the moment. And I set up virtual interviews that were between 30 and 45 minutes long, audio recorded those interviews and transcribed those interviews, and ultimately kind of did an analysis of that, like a preliminary analysis of that, and then combined it and synthesized those to kind of look at those broader themes and how they were connecting across all the responses. And, they kind of, the findings kind of shook out in a few different areas across sort of like psychological impact and professional sort of disillusion and I guess disenchantment. And I mean, and just sort of experiences. I mean, I can talk a little bit about the findings. It was kind of straightforward, and I guess as a qualitative researcher, I kind of did all the normal things that I would do. I got informed consent and anonymized the data and approach this in a way that is as ethical as I would any other research project, and always knew that I wanted to write up the results and hopefully publish them in a media outlet that was like not behind a paywall so that people could actually read the research and it could be widely distributed. And maybe like the dream is like it kind of gets the word out there. It just sort of felt like it feels like now that like the layoffs in the federal government and in the contracting sector and even adjacent industries, because so many industries rely on the federal government, they're just kind of like people are just moving on. Like there are so many people out of work right now, and a lot of this is self-inflicted. Like we did this to ourselves, and it was avoidable, I believe. And there are a lot of people that are really struggling, even still.
I definitely appreciated your combination or your sequencing, I'm sorry, of doing this like survey and then going to the interviews.
Yeah.
Obviously, as mixed methods researchers ourselves, we've seen it, all different ways and possibilities depending on what your circumstances, what your goals are, things like that. But I definitely appreciate you keeping that survey short because too many times people want, all these other nice to know things rather than need to know.
Yeah.
And you're trying to get, a starting point to understanding what was going on. So I definitely appreciate that.
Yeah, and I kept the questions pretty basic too, right? Like I wanted to just kind of get a snapshot of like, how is this impacting you personally, professionally? Like, here's a list of things that you can choose from, and is there anything that I'm missing here? And how did this was because in my experience at my company, the layoffs were not handled very humanely, in my opinion. And I heard this across interviews, and I saw this in the survey results too, that it was very abrupt. There was often a lack of communication, transparency around the layoffs, as if like we did not see this coming, right? I mean, like there seemed to be like no crisis management plans in place to kind of deal with this kind of thing. And I realized that this has not ever happened before, but we did have some advance warning that it could happen. And I don't know, we could have we could have scrambled to get our ducks in a row a little bit better, and we didn't. And so I wanted to understand what the lead up to being laid off, what did that look like? What did it look like afterwards? Did you receive support from your company? Did you receive support from your wider networks? What does support look like, 2 months, 3 months, 4 months on? What would have been helpful to you? Those kinds of things. And then, and then of course, I wanted to dig into just tell me in your own words what this has meant to you, like losing your job, being laid off. How is that? And what really emerged there is that it did not tell a story of bloat and waste and fraud, if you can imagine, as was the Doge and Trump administration narrative. It was mission-driven people who have dedicated their lives, a lot of them, to public service, doing, as I said earlier, core critical work that put good into the world. And ironically, was a lot of it helping the government to operate more efficiently, right? And a lot of people lost their jobs overnight, cut off from systems, no thank yous, no goodbyes, in some cases, no severance. Yeah, it like people were really just felt quite diminished by all of it. And some other words too, that they use to describe the experience.
Right.
Do you have a sense of like the proportion of respondents, either to the survey, the interviews, or all together, that were employees embedded in the federal government versus, say, like contractors who were impacted? Like I was a contractor who was impacted. And because of living in the DC area and knowing a lot of people who work for the government, I've definitely seen, a lot of instances where people have been impacted and, Stacey was impacted as well. So it's like, it seems almost like being in this area, it's like we're seeing more of it because we're closer to the front line, as it were, compared to other parts of the country. So I'm kind of wondering, like, what's your sense of that breakdown in the government as an employee versus on the outside?
Yeah, well, I know that in my research, everyone identified themselves as a contractor. So not a federal government employee, except maybe one person, if I'm remembering correctly, that I did an interview with who was embedded in a particular agency as an employee. But others were contractors working on specific contracts, or in my case, across different contracts for different agencies. And I mean, I was kind of looking into this actually to understand, because oftentimes like government contractors are sort of like just sort of like lumped into like I'll back up when I was looking at like exactly how many people were laid off from the federal government, because the numbers, there's a dispute over how many exactly have been like laid off or took like buyouts or whatever, like whatever all the different various ways that they could do it, but ultimately are no longer there. They were part of the Doge purge. I was sort of seeing some numbers that were including contractors and then others that were sort of like, separating them out. So I'm not exactly quite sure. I was curious how many contractors actually were laid off versus how many federal workers. And that number has been harder for me to find. I did see something like 300,000 federal workers, not including contractors, were laid off. But again, there seems to be some dispute around that too, which I think that's problematic too, not being able to kind of know those numbers. Like, And maybe that's because our government isn't recording those numbers, right? We would normally look to the government to record those numbers. And they're not really into like data. So
Yeah.
yeah. But all the people in mine, apart from maybe one, were actually contractors. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you brought up a good point that a lot of like the research work that had been going on was part of the Evidence Act, it was under the aegis of the Evidence Act. And so that was designed to help, make the government run more efficiently and use data to drive decision making. And yeah, it's really ironic that, or something,
Yeah.
that, something that, under this sort of label of, trying to become more efficient, that they laid us all off.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, it's just, yeah, totally agree.
Yep. Yep.
But yeah, I think maybe we should talk a little bit about sort of the psychological and emotional impact of all this. I mean, I guess have people really faced like an identity crisis due to
Yeah.
these layoffs?
Yeah, I think so. I asked questions around that, and consensus is an erosion of self-esteem, confidence, people feeling deeply anxious and depressed. Understandably, folks have lost a primary income, they've lost critical benefits, especially for people that are maybe older and disabled. A couple people reported experiencing what they thought was maybe ageism and ableism in the hiring process, and more than those reported or shared with me that they were less inclined to disclose disability on applications. They were doing things to obscure age, like removing dates from their LinkedIn and their resume, just to increase their chances of being hired. And then that's problematic too. And then other things that people reported is that they felt, and I suppose this goes with being maybe older and disabled, but feeling invisible, feeling disposable, hopeless, lost. These were some words that people use to describe their experience. That was kind of one question that I asked folks. What are some words that you would use to describe your situation or that you wish people understood about your situation? Some people feel guilt over spending or enjoying themselves when they're unemployed. They don't feel like they can. Obvious grief over losing meaningful mission-driven work and the disillusion of programs that were serving communities that needed it the most here in the US and globally. Yeah, it's been a real challenge. And all of this was a year ago, and then that people were reporting this either in the survey or in interviews. And since then, the 15 that gave me updates, which were email updates, several reported still, navigating psychological struggles. I myself am still navigating that. I'm still not fully employed. I don't have a full-time job, and this job market is just unlike anything I've ever seen before. And this is something else that people reported. And then, of course, a lot of folks that had spent their almost entire careers working in government contracting, and some were even former federal employees that pivoted to contracting, just sort of feel like, where do they go from here? How do they translate these skills? It's not as easy as, the career services industrial complex would have you think. Like it's just not that simple, So these are all some of the things that people are just still navigating. And honestly, like, this is anecdotal, but I still see these kinds of posts on LinkedIn and in like my other networking circles still. So I know it's still going on. People are still feeling these things. They're still navigating it, questioning themselves, wondering what's next, etc.
Yeah, I mean, I still see posts like how people have applied to, hundreds of jobs, and, they give a breakdown of like, I applied this many jobs, I got this ghosted by this many, like,
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, for so many people, I think there was an idea of I've got this government job, this is, I'm in this career, I've been doing it for 10 plus years. This is what I'm going to do until I retire.
Yes.
Because you're an expert, you're doing great work, it is
Yep.
beneficial to society,
Mhm.
and then it just gets snatched away.
Yeah.
And that's just a lot.
Yeah.
Have you considered reaching out to quote unquote survivors people who are like almost like left behind in these agencies, the ones who are trying to like, hold down the fort, keep the, good work going. Because it seems like that would be an interesting perspective as well, but I'm not sure if that's, something that you're not interested in pursuing.
Yeah, no, that's actually a good point. I have thought about that. And, I've maintained relationships with some of the people I've formerly worked with. And, I know that some of them experience what they call as survivor's guilt, right? Like they, as you said, they've been kind of left behind, often taking on additional work from their colleagues that are no longer there. And then on top of it, feeling like bad that they got to keep their jobs and others were laid off. And then also on top of it, some of them have sort of like complications with continuing to do work in service of a government that is the government that we have. You know what I mean? But they also need jobs. So it's equally as complicated. And I have thought about doing that, and maybe I will. It's
That'll be in the next paper.
my hundred other things, but like it is a very worthwhile and important perspective. I would agree. Yeah. And I would say also to your point a second ago, Bill, when I was working at Aptiv, we were doing a lot of recruitment, marketing, and advertising research. So the last administration was invested in diversifying the federal workforce, namely sort of reaching and resonating with like new, fresh talent, specifically in STEM, because they wanted to bring them in and because they wanted to sort of modernize the government. So they thought by bringing young people in, they could do that. And one of the things that the government has always sort of like sold themselves on is that they are stable, that there's job security. And that was one thing that distinguished them from the private sector. And that is really no more. But by default, the government contracting sector, as you said, was also viewed as stable. And people that I spoke to from my research said that, they no longer see it as that. They feel it's precarious and unpredictable, and there's a real reluctance for several of them to return to that sector, even when maybe things kind of settle, if that's going to happen, which is a shame, a real shame.
Yeah, it used to be, and I know plenty of people that have done this. You could go kind of from one contractor to another contractor. Some people followed like the contracts around,
Yeah.
so there was stability in the field. But yeah, that's no more. Now there are whole companies that are gone, basically.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. But are there any happy stories in there?
Well, yeah, yeah, for sure. Like when I asked questions about like looking ahead, what's next for you? What are you thinking about? What are you excited about? And, while some people are, a little bit pessimistic and not they're a little bit pessimistic, obviously, about the direction of the country, but there's optimism around eventual recovery and think that this is a moment, or they see this moment as an opportunity to build more equitable practices in contracting. So some of the examples, and whether any of this will come to pass, I don't know, but this is what people want. And that's kind of where it starts, hopefully, is, reducing some of the examples were like reducing top heavy management. I mean, we could argue that's a problem across every industry, public or private. Introducing contract terms that protect workers against this kind of instability and sort of like shifting of political priorities, cooperatives for networking and support, crisis management plans to be able to respond to this kind of stuff. Yeah, they see this as an opportunity and would hope to see that there are some changes in the sector and feel it might have to come from sort of a grassroots push. And the moment has reinforced people's values and their commitment to doing mission-driven work wherever and whenever they can. They might be a little bit some skeptical or cynical about the industry or about the direction of the country. They are steadfast on their values and doing good work that makes a meaningful difference in people's lives. And then a lot of them are just sort of figuring it out. They're upskilling, they're diversifying their skills, they're going into entrepreneurship or back to it, as in Stacey's case.
Yeah.
Looking for multiple income streams, just trying to sort of create some safety and control over otherwise uncontrollable situations and variables, right? And kind of be a little bit more in charge of what their lives look like and how things unfold. Yeah, so I guess that's, to me, a real demonstration of resilience and resourcefulness of people. And that to me is positive and heartening,
Definitely.
Yeah.
This has been really great. I really appreciate
Okay,
you
good. Thank
joining
you.
us. And I think this is very, very important stuff. It's very timely. It's a great example of the relevance that mixed methods research can have.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times we think of it as like, oh, this will be in a report and it'll be put on a shelf and, maybe in the next cycle. So no, this is actually happening now.
Yeah.
And it's really important, I think, for us to be able to hear this and to review it. And I'm looking forward to any other updates or side, spin-off projects, as it were, related to this topic. So thank you.
Thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity. I have officially pitched a couple of media outlets. I won't say who they are. So fingers crossed somebody wants my article, and I'm kind of like, shaping the article and plugging in sources to support my argument. So thank you. And I will keep everybody updated about if something is published on this research and if I, continue on and talk to others. I did want to just, if I could, just plug Mind the Movement, Stacey, as you're aware, because it's very relevant to this work. So this is an organization that I've partnered with, and they're doing great work in this world. They provide access to mental health care for unemployed, uninsured, frontline democracy workers, so federal workers, contractors, community organizers, and political campaign staffers. The founder and executive director, Ashley Williams, who is an organizer and campaign staffer, just identified a huge gap and need in this world for this kind of support and care. And we're offering it now. So we offer subsidized therapy, support groups, downloadable resources, and anybody can find out more information on the website. It's mindthemovement.org. Because we're here to help and we want to get the word out. So yeah, I just want to plug them.
That's great. Yeah, we can include a link in our podcast notes.
Thanks.
So, sure.
Appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thanks for being on.
All right. I'll talk to you soon. Or see you on the interwebs.
See you on the interwebs.